Chapter 3. I was entirely ignorant of school law or how one went about organizing a school district, so I made up my mind to find out. I never for an instant let up on my plans, only enlarged them. Each hindrance only seemed to strengthen my determination to surmount all obstacles. I learned the county commissioners were the ones to establish a new school district. One of our Reno neighbors, Ed Ferris, was a county commissioner. I lost no time in seeing him and told him of our homestead plans. I asked what the chances were of organizing a school where there were no other children but our 5. Ed was a big, jovial fellow. He gave a hearty laugh, slapping me on the shoulders, and said, "Ha ha, Miss Olds, you have kids enough of your own to move out into the sagebrush any place and demand the state erect and support a school for you. It only requires 5 children to organize a school district in Nevada." What wonderful words! I was simply jubilant. My dreams were coming true. I knew Daddy was still staunchly objecting, but things had worked out my way. My good news put faith in my heart and wings to my feet. We were 2 miles from Ed Ferris's place by wagon road, but not nearly so far across the fields. Going home, I skipped across fields, jumped irrigation ditches, crawled through barbed wire fences, and burst into our house, tired but breathless. I threw my arms around Daddy's neck, announced my good news. Then, giving him a big hug, I said, "So now what's keeping us? Let's go homesteading." "All right, old lady, do as you darn please. You will anyway." I knew when he said that he had decided I was right. It was just Daddy's masculine way of surrender. Once he did surrender, he would always join in my proposition so wholeheartedly that one would think that it was all his idea in the first place. From then on, we planned together on what we would do and how to make money to live on, for we had to start from scratch. There were no game laws in Nevada at the time, so our plans of survival were these. Daddy would kill game, each in its own natural season, and I would take it to Reno and sell it. What great plans we made while lying awake nights. How strange that in making plans one never includes the difficulties they may encounter. We never once thought about washouts, droughts, or sickness. Owing to Daddy's health, I should have included sickness, but I didn't. I was so sure that with rest, fresh air, and sunshine, Daddy would recover. That was the only real disappointment we ever had on the homestead. He partially recovered, and God left him with us for the next 20 years, but he was never strong again or able to do much manual labor. Apparently, I thrived on hard work. I think there was never a woman blessed with better health than I was. I seemed to have strength enough for both of us. Our move to the homestead was of great concern of all the neighbors, friends, and relatives. They all predicted hardships and starvation and said, "It can't be done." One old neighbor came the morning we left with a little bunch of fruit trees and some gooseberry and currant bushes and cuttings in his wagon. He gave me the only friendly advice and encouragement that I had heard from anyone. "Mrs. Olds," he told me, "I know with your youth and your strength you can do it." We had hired 2 teamsters to haul our furniture and supplies out to the homestead. The neighbors were all there with tears and dire predictions to bid us goodbye. And with their sad farewells in my ears, I said, "Don't say goodbye to me. You're the nearest neighbors I have, and I'm not going to say goodbye to you every time I see you." I waved to them, picked up the lines, and started out singing "Sweet Betsy from Pike," although I think Sweet Betsy had more worldly goods when she was starting over the mountains than we had when we were starting homesteading. We must have made a queer-looking procession going through town. Our start in ranching consisted of 2 milk cows, a yearling Jersey heifer, a 3-day-old calf, a tall, bony old gray horse named Johnny, and a spring wagon. The 3 little girls, Jessie, Allison, Leslie, and myself, were perched up on the seat of the wagon. I held 15-month-old baby Albert on my lap and held the calf firmly between my feet while driving the old horse, although it was a strained way to ride 35 miles. Our oldest son, Edson, was sitting in the back of the wagon on top of the chicken brooder, which held 50 baby chicks. He held the lead ropes of the 2 milk cows. Daddy, walking behind with the buggy whip, tapped them with the whip to keep them in pace with the horse, and herded the yearling heifer, which was loose. These were city cows, and like ourselves, were headed for an entirely new way of life. Our trip through town was slow. Dogs ran out to bark, scaring the cows and causing all kinds of delay. But when we reached the outskirts of town and started for the great open spaces, we made better progress, and Daddy climbed into the wagon and up on the brooder with Edson. Our first stop was at 8 Mile Spring, as indicated, 8 miles from Reno. We halted there for lunch. I had prepared enough food in a big grub box for the 9 of us for 2 days. The teamsters had made better time than we and had a campfire going and water boiling for coffee when we arrived. We unloaded the children and the calf, allowing them to play while we rested. Then we all ate. It had taken us 5 hours to make the first 8 miles. We had to make 20 Mile House that night, for that was the next water hole safe for drinking. True, there was Dry Bone Lake a few miles ahead, but it was just one of those alkali slicks which abound in Nevada, a depression in the ground that fills each spring with runoff from the melting snow in the hills. That spring there had been big runoff, and Dry Bone Lake was quite a body of water. It was at least 3 miles long and 2 miles wide, but only 2 feet deep. It was a horrible death trap for weak cattle turned out in the spring. The bottom of the lake was alkaline and sticky. Weak stock would wade in there to drink, get stuck, fall, struggle, and die. In a year or two, their dry bones would be shining on the shore, hence the name. After lunching and resting, we plodded slowly along, till about half-mile past Dry Bone. We started up grade. Daisy, one of the old milk cows, lay down to rest. After letting her rest half an hour of our precious time, we decided we'd have to get moving if we were to reach 20 Mile House before dark. We began trying to make her get up. We twisted her tail, hit her with the buggy whip, not hard enough to have any effect. And Daddy cussed her, but old Daisy just lay there chewing her cud. Finally, after what seemed to be an age of delay, we had a happy thought. Maybe she needed a drink. We set Edson back to Dry Bone for a bucket of water. He didn't have much water left in his open bucket after a half-mile walk, but was enough, for Daisy would have none of it. This made Daddy so furious, he grabbed the pail, threw the water in her face with the ejaculation, "There, you damned old bitch! Take that!" That had the desired effect. It scared Daisy, and she jumped up. Our present troubles were over, and we anxiously started on, for the sun was getting low, and we had several miles to go. The children had heard us speak of 20 Mile House and thought of it as some great goal to be reached. They kept asking questions about it for hours. When will we get there? What kind of beds will we have to sleep in? And so on, and so on. 20 Mile House had, in former days, been a stopping place for big teams on the old Oregon Trail. The big barn was still standing, but the original house had burned down, and there was only a 3-room cabin in its place. It stood at the crossroads, one road going to Pyramid Lake, the other running northwest toward Surprise Valley in California. Most of the time, the house was uninhabited. Occasionally, some old bachelor would move in. Laying in a good supply of liquor, he would sell water and give away the liquor, thus eliminating the problem of having to pay a liquor license. When 20 Mile House was open, a man could always liquor up cheap. It was now supposed to be vacant. It had a good stove in it, and there was a plentiful supply of water. We arrived just at dusk, and we came around the bend in the road. We could see the old barn and the corrals. When the children, who had been stretching their necks in eagerness, saw the little weather-beaten board house, they were greatly discouraged. But look, there was friendly smoke coming out the chimney, and someone was ringing the old triangle supper iron. We all unloaded and found the house occupied by country road workers, 10 men and a cook. The cook was a generous, good-natured fellow, for when he saw us drive in, he hollered, "Come and get it!" We hesitated. There were 9 of us, but the cook insisted we come in and eat. There was plenty for all, he said. What a meal! A great platter of ham and eggs, stacks of hot biscuits, boiled potatoes with the jackets on, and bowls of brown gravy. For dessert, there was an inevitable bowl of stewed dried peaches. You could always find some dried fruit of some variety in any desert or cow camp, and if cooked properly, it was surprising how tasty it is. The road crew had built bunks in the house and put straw in them for mattresses, which they now vacated in honor of us and went to the barn with their bedding. We bedded down in the bunks, and the next morning the children came running up to me, exclaiming, "Oh, Mama, will we have such nice beds like that on the homestead?" The long, tiresome ride of the day before had fitted them for a good night's sleep in almost any kind of bed. We arose early after another good hot meal awaiting us, with another good hot meal awaiting us. It was a duplicate of the night before. Those 2 hot meals were the only help I ever had from the country. We started early on the last lap of our journey to the homestead. It was a bright, beautiful morning in April, with the sun shining, the birds singing, and the spring desert flowers blooming. In Nevada, we have a little pink flower that is called the sandflower. It grows out in the desert with its foliage flat on the ground, almost covered with sand, leaving the pink bloom sticking straight up on an 1.5-inch stem. It grows in great clusters after a wet winter. On that lovely morning, the desert was covered for miles and miles with a carpet of pink, and the bluebirds in great flocks were flitting back and forth across the road, and the beautiful painted hills off to our right were outstanding in all their rainbow hues. All nature seemed to be giving us a welcome to our new home. We stopped for lunch the second day in a canyon where there was a grassy spot below a bubbling spring. Every stop along our way to the homestead holds a place in my memory like a milepost on my road of life. We rested there a while. The children were all tired and getting fussy, constantly asking, "When do we get there? How much farther is it?" Only little 4-year-old Leslie was happy and contented. When we would ask her how she was getting along, she would answer with the brightest smile, "Pretty fine." It was an inspiration to hear that little "pretty fine." We asked it often just to bolster up our own morale. There were 5 more weary miles to go. Our homestead was inside a big company field. In the old days, a company would fence miles of land they had no title to. Such a one was the PF Company. Our property was inside their fence and a mile from the main road. As we passed through the meadow, the grass was up to the hubs of our wagon wheels. We arrived at the cabin about 4 p.m. Daddy had gone with the teamsters from our lunch spot and was up at the cabin to greet us when we arrived. He held up his arms to give me a lift out of the wagon. I put one foot on the step of the dashboard and reached to Daddy's helping hand and jumped. With a little more luck than skill, my skirts missed the brakes and the wheels, and I landed safely. Daddy took me by the arm, led me to the cabin door, and with a grand sweep of his hand said, "There, old lady, there's your home, and it's damn near in the heart of Egypt." I'll admit it wasn't as beautiful as the little fruit ranch of long ago, but it looked good to me, and I was sure we would soon make it beautiful. It didn't look very good to our 8-year-old Jessie. When she saw the unfinished cabin, she began to cry and said, "Is this the kind of old place you brought us to?" True, the windows were not yet installed. They had purposely left the door casings unfinished, for I had an old home comfort steel range that wouldn't go through an ordinary door. The carpenter's workbench was still in the kitchen, and the floor was covered in shavings. "Yes, Jessie, this is our home, and everyone is going to help make it look nice." At that, she grabbed the broom and made the shavings fly. At first glimpse I had of the home might have been discouraging to most people. There was the unfinished 2-room cabin, our furniture sitting around in the sagebrush where the teamsters had unloaded it. I had a semi-invalid husband and 5 little children aged from 11 years down to a 15-month-old baby, and $1.50 left after paying the teamsters. No wonder my friends and relatives all said I was crazy. As I look back now, I think they put it mildly. But I was neither dismayed nor discouraged. There was never a general going into battle with more assurance of victory than I had of making success of the little homestead and getting an education for the children. One of the teamsters was a lanky fellow, very slow of speech. He had been raised out in the hills. Just in the way of conversation, I said, "Well, what do you think of the layout?" When he hesitated, I quickly added, "Never mind answering that." I never heard so many detrimental remarks about our endeavor. I had already heard so many detrimental remarks about our endeavor that I had insulated myself by not listening to what anyone had to say. He drawled out, "Well, now, I seen a darn sight worse looking places than this. Wasn't exactly an encouraging remark, but it wasn't discouraging either. There we were at last, planted on the homestead, with so many things to do. It was hard to decide what to do first. Since it was already late afternoon, the first business was preparing for the night. Jessie had done a good job of clearing away the shavings. We moved the cook stove in and set it up. Then we finished the door casings and hung both doors. There was a front door and a back door directly opposite each other, which proved to be a godsend till our trees grew big enough to furnish shade. The draft through the open doors was a blessing. Our furnishings were meager. We set up the beds, brought in the table and chairs, and were all ready for housekeeping. We had a folding couch in the kitchen where Edson slept, and where later many a passerby joined him for a night's rest, for our little home, though a mile off the main road, soon became a stopping place for all who passed by. Supper was simple that first evening. We were all too tired either to cook or to eat. After a good night's rest, we all felt fine and started in to make success of our homestead. We'd always lived near a store where we could replenish the food as it disappeared. Now we were 35 miles from supplies. I had never known what it was to make note of things as they gave out. Before we embarked on our homestead trip, I had bought what I considered enough food to last for months. Now I was very surprised to see my mountain of food vanish in a very short time. One of our first problems was to work things out so as not to make any unnecessary trips to town. We'd been our home about a week when this and that began to get scarce. Our $1.50 began to look mighty small. It was then we thought of the 3 older children's banks. They each had a 10-cent bank full of making a total of $30. I had laid them away in the bottom of an old trunk and forgotten about them. Now we were forced to break them open and use the money to buy grub.